I was talking to my little sister Judy on the phone, and our conversation got on college days. Our college experiences overlapped a bit. And then we started talking about her good friend Joanne, who is her roommate. And on one given weekend, Judy and Joanne went to visit Joanne's family, who lived in Syracuse, New York. So it was a good drive from Bowling Green for a weekend. That particular Sunday, they were heading back, and it was already getting late, but they wanted to get back to Bowling Green because they were good students. They were going to attend class on Monday morning. And as they're driving along, there was this sound, this noise under the hood of the car. They both noticed it. Joanne looked at Judy and said, "Do you know what's causing that?" And Judy said, "No." Joanne said, "Neither do I." So they drove on a few more minutes. The sound continued. Joanne said to Judy, "Do you know anything about fixing cars?" And Judy said, "No." And Joanne said, "Neither do I." And a few more minutes passed. And then finally Joanne said, "Well, there's only one thing we can do about this." And she reached over and turned up the volume on the radio as loud as it would go. If you can't fix something, you drown it out. How many times we try to cover up problems? At first, sometimes we don't even admit there are troubles or problems, but then we pretend, we cover them up, we try to make them disappear. Be honest, and I'm not looking for a show of hands, but how many people here have suddenly run through your living room and gathered up stuff because a guest is coming? And like, this shouldn't be lying here. And you stick it in a closet and you close the door and you pray that the guest will not open the closet door. We do things like that. Or at the last minute, you discover that little spot on the carpet and there's no time to clean it. So you conveniently move a piece of furniture to cover the spot. Let's be honest, we do things like that. We cover up problems. But nonetheless, we have to admit there are problems. We live in an imperfect world. And I'm not just talking about cars that make noise, nor am I talking about spots on the carpet. I'm talking about, we look at the big world, there's problems. We look at our families, our small world, there are problems. We look at our own lives, and it's far from perfect. What do we do with that? That is a major question to ask. If we use the parlance, the words of the gospel reading today, we discover there are weeds in the field of good wheat. What do we do about the weeds? I sometimes think that the biggest theological question, the biggest question is not the existence of God. I think that becomes pretty self-evident if people really look around. The biggest theological question is, what about evil? How do we deal with evil? Where does it come from? What's the cause of it? And it's not an easy answer. In fact, it's so complex that I'm going to save that for another homily. Today, I just want to say, let's admit that we have evil, we have weeds in our world. Now, if anybody here grew up on a farm, or even if you're a good gardener, you should have started laughing at this gospel reading. Because the weeds are coming up, and the servants say to the master, "We thought you planted good seeds." "Well, I did." "Well, where are the weeds coming from?" We all ask that question. Where do the weeds come from, right? And you know what? What makes it really more humorous to me is you don't have to plant the seeds of weeds. They find their own way there. But there are weeds in our world. Some people like to deny it, cover it up, pretend it's not there. Some people choose to blame. I knew a man who would blame people for everything. Something would go wrong, he would find somebody to blame, and that included God. And it wasn't uncommon that he would say, "Somebody up there doesn't like me." And I used to always think to myself, if something goes right, does he say someone up there loves me? In fact, I think I actually said that to him one day. What the gospel passage is saying is that we have the weeds, but we also have the good seed. And if last week, with the parable of the seeds, I said, rule number 5, don't waste good. This week, I think we're picking up on that, and we're saying, trust the good. Keep an eye on the good. The good seeds are growing. Trust that they will grow and they will produce, and that will be in spite of the weeds. There is good planted in our world. This parable starts with that wonderful phrase that's kind of a lead-in to about 75% of the parables. The lead-in is Jesus says, the kingdom of heaven is like. And he's basically saying, Jesus has come to plant the seeds, and the seeds are good seeds, and they are growing. We have to trust in the power of the seed of goodness to grow in our hearts, in our lives, in our families, in our world. The good is better than the weed. We have to remember that. And some days it's hard to keep our focus on the good. We trust. Trust is really not easy. Trust sounds like it's about the future, but it starts right here and now. Trust is not intellectual, but it is complete knowledge of something. It's conviction, maybe even without proof. Trust simply knows we're not alone. Trust means God, who is good, continues to take care of us. If we can keep our eye on the seed, the good seed, on the goodness, that also helps us with one other thing, and that helps us not to fall into victimhood. It's so easy to play the part of the victim. You know, the world's fallen apart. Why did they do this to me? Victimhood is never good. Things do happen. Sometimes there is an enemy sowing seeds. Sometimes things just seem to happen. But we don't have to play victim, because victim sort of exonerates ourselves. Like we don't have any responsibility on how to deal with it. When I worked with prisoners, I found that many of them, contrary to what you think of or see on TV or movies, a lot of them would admit the crime that they had done. Maybe they would talk about that. But I also noticed that many of them would use a phrase. It was kind of a strange phrase. And the phrase was simply referring to their situation. They would say, well, when I caught this case, and then go on. Or like, my life was pretty good till I caught this case. And I think for some, saying I caught this case was a shorthand way of saying, well, when I was arrested and tried and convicted and sentenced. But for others to say, I caught this case, it always made me think, it's like you caught the cold, you caught chicken pox, you catch the flu. By saying I caught this case was almost like saying, it just happened to me. That's victimhood. Nothing good comes out of that. Sometimes bad things come at us, but we don't want to play the victim, because the victim does not allow themselves to deal with the issue. We have to deal with it. We admit there are noises in the car. We don't want to cover it up. We have to admit that sometimes the house gets dirty and messy. We have to admit our lives can be out of control. We have to admit there are weeds in the field. But because we trust in the good, we work with that good. We work with it, and we help it grow. And we help in the harvest. That's the kingdom of God growing in our midst.